Brett, welcome to Mitiga Mic.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So, Brett, we've done some podcasts in the past together, but for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with you, if you could quickly introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I'm the CTO at Bastille. Bastille is a wireless security company. My background is electrical engineering. Got a PhD in wireless communications from Georgia Tech. Did a lot of work at Georgia Tech running the GTRI software-defined radio lab. Worked in a number of different companies, including Raytheon Technologies. Now working at Bastille as the CTO, I'm running R&D for the company, developing, mostly working threat research, helping to improve the company's abilities to automate detection of threats and identify malicious behaviors as well as suboptimal configurations, that kind of thing.
Great. Well, I wanted to talk about a couple things today. First, I wanted to talk about some very popular attacks. They've been in the media quite a bit. You've spoken on them. I've spoken on them a little bit. And then I want to dive into data centers. But let's kick things off. A lot of our viewers have probably heard of the evil twin attack, but go ahead and take us through exactly what that is, because I think the way you explain it, and again, given your background and your experience through Bastille as well, kind of puts you in a very authoritative position to kind of talk through exactly why is this thing so bad and why we should be concerned.
Okay, sure. So there's a number of different ways that an evil twin attack can be instantiated, but the one that I talk about probably the most is where I take some COTS hardware that's could be even purpose built for this function, but it might be something that's flexible. It's just a Wi-Fi interface, and then I can program it to do any number of things. And there's open source code repositories that I can use to instantiate an evil twin attack. And the way that I like to think about it is I'm going to emulate with my rogue device, I'm going to emulate an access point on a network that is protected. And I'm going to target that network to try to extract credentials. And there's any number of ways that I can do that. But again, one of the simple ways is let me just set up an AP. I'm going to send out beacons, and I'm going to get some client to try to connect to my access point. At that point, I can do any number of things. If they just connect, especially if it's not a protected network, it's easy. I can just grab them and start interacting with them and maybe compromise the client device. But a more dangerous approach long-term would be me trying to crack into an encrypted network by trying to trick a user into divulging their credentials to me. So a simple thing to do would be once they join my network, I would offer them a splash page saying, we're undergoing maintenance, whatever. I put a pretty logo on it. I make it look convincing and ask them to reestablish their credentials just to make sure, everything's on the up and up. And if I've convinced them, I get my credentials right away. But maybe I don't, and then I have to do a check against whatever they send me to see I can do this either actively or passively, having acquired a four-way handshake. I can check the credentials to see if they pass muster. And if not, I refresh the splash page and say, thanks for trying. That was the wrong password. Try again. So eventually I get them to give up their credentials. And now I've got access. Once that happens, I got access to the protected network, but I can also maintain my position as a man in the middle to compromise that device, as well as provide network services, modify the data that's going back and forth, whatever I want to do. But the most important thing is I now have access to that network.
Yeah, I like how you said at the very beginning, you can buy a purpose-built tool, but you don't need a purpose-built tool for this, right?
Yeah.
You have a wireless access point, and I guess, a lot of the attacks I see that people use the pineapple, for example, which is one of those purpose-built solutions. A lot of it is because you can overpower it, right? So you maybe show up higher in your list of wireless access points. So I'll click on this one. That's by design, and then there's some de-authentication packets perhaps being sent and things like that. So people have to reconnect, and they want to reconnect to the one that's more powerful. But that's in a nice little package. You plug it in and you hit go. But you don't need to do that, because like you said, there's so many repositories and you can build this.
Yeah.
If somebody has the technical aptitude, not everyone's you, but let's say somebody says, oh, I'm going to try to put this together and I'll get a wireless access point and try to download some code that allows this. What's the out of pocket, you think? What would it cost somebody to build their own version of this thing?
I haven't looked at these devices recently, but definitely less than $100. A
Yeah,
pineapple you
yeah,
can have for maybe 200 or $300,
yeah.
but a
So if
standard just a interface, I want to say like 40, $60 somewhere in there. It's very, very inexpensive. And
So
again, like you
sub
say,
100 to
you can
build it
buy that.
yourself in a
Sorry,
couple hundred. So sub 100 to build it
easily.
yourself and a couple hundred to buy in the box, just plug it in kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you say, you can do the work to make that cheaper version work. And it's not that hard. It does take a little more technical acumen, or you can buy the out of the box version, and it's pretty straightforward. It's a GUI based interface. You set it up and hit go.
It's crazy how simple it is. And we've probably all seen it without knowing it, right? At our,
Yeah,
hotels where you see, 50 wireless access points or, any kind of business park, right?
right.
Where you'll see those. Interesting. Well, so Evil Twin, there's a lot of content out there about that, but a really popular and easy and inexpensive type of attack. But
Mhm.
let's pivot to Nearest Neighbor, which I think is really a story about persistence and how persistent hackers can be and how creative they can be in
It
order
is.
to go after their target. So maybe share a little bit about Nearest Neighbor.
Yeah, let me just back up for a minute though. So transitioning from Evil Twin to Nearest Neighbor, I think highlights one of the interesting things about the Nearest Neighbor attack. So Evil Twin, as I said, you got an interface that you're going to set up as an access point. So you have to be within earshot, and by earshot I mean the client has to be able to hear my access points or my fake access points beacons, and I have to be able to hear them. So I have to be close enough physically to be able to pull off that attack. But then a couple of years back, there was an interesting attack that was publicized in the news where someone had forward deployed, if you will, some hardware to conduct this attack on some drones. And they landed those drones on the rooftop of the target organization, and they conducted the attack remotely. So now the attacker didn't need to be physically close, but they had to deploy hardware. So they had some skin in the game, but not much. I mean, it's much lower cost to lose a few $100 or a couple $1,000 of hardware, especially if you're going after a high value target. Now comes along this idea of this nearest neighbor attack. And this was conducted by, as you say, a persistent, an APT. And these guys were very patient and very creative. And what they did was they were able to leverage existing wireless devices to conduct a very similar kind of attack. So they wanted to penetrate some target organization's network. And there were some things in the network infrastructure that were maybe a little bit suboptimal in terms of security, but it was mostly a pretty well locked down organization. They were able to determine, using a password spraying attack, they were able to guess and establish that they had the proper credentials, but MFA prevented the attacker from penetrating the network remotely using public-facing services. So what they did is they attacked organizations that were nearby, and having penetrated their networks, they weren't
Physically
as
nearby,
secure.
like
Physically nearby.
same
So when I
parking
say
lot
neighbor,
kind of
I
thing.
mean like
Yeah.
they were just down the road or
Yeah.
across the street.
Yeah.
They were very close. And then all they had to do was, I say all, I mean, it's a little bit challenging, but it's not that hard. Each step of this really isn't that difficult, but it showed a level of patience and persistence and to develop this chain because no one had done it before. Now we know it can be done. It's not that hard to do. So they penetrate a neighbor's network. They find a device on that network that's dual homed, so they can pivot to the wireless domain and use that dual homed network to penetrate their primary target's Wi-Fi. Because they had the credentials and they were sharing credentials across domains, Wi-Fi didn't have MFA implemented, so they were able to use this vector to get onto the primary target. This is really creative, but it's also not that hard when you consider the billions and billions, tens of billions really, of devices that have wireless interfaces. If I'm an attacker, I need to get onto one of those devices so I can use the wireless interface as part of my attack. Now I don't have to be anywhere close.
Yeah.
I can be across the ocean, as these attackers were, and conduct a successful network penetration attack. It's fascinating to see this vector kind of evolve to what it is now, but wireless doesn't need, I mean, with so many devices around, we don't need to be closed. We just need to exploit something that is close.
Yeah. A wireless attack from thousands of miles away, which I
Exactly.
think is really interesting. And in the case you cited, um, and we are talking about persistence, one of the things that I thought was most interesting is, so they try to get into organization A, they can't. They get through on, wired connected network to organization B. That's also wireless. Use that wireless then to connect to organization A. Great. I
Yeah.
mean, a little bit of extra work. They had to, pull up some Google Maps. They had to do some analysis, and then they get in.
Right.
But then they lose connectivity, or they're booted out eventually of organization B, and that doesn't deter them. So they're very persistent. Then they attack organization C, who is also in close proximity, and they do
Yeah.
the exact same thing. Poor organization A. They just
Right.
can't. They just can't win, right? But it
Yeah.
does show how persistent these attackers can be, and often you're putting so many controls into your more traditional network environment juxtaposed to your wireless, because you're like, it's what, you got to be kind of close, and who's going to do it, and this and that.
Yeah.
But that completely changed the paradigm, I think. So very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
So I think that gives some of our viewers who maybe weren't as familiar with some of these wireless airspace issues some background. But as we said at the beginning, I'd really like to double click on data centers, because data centers are one of these areas that are just, well, first of all, they're sprouting up everywhere, especially now with a lot of the AI investment and things like that.
Yes.
And we all know the cloud providers. So data centers are a thing, and they are a targeted thing.
Yeah.
But maybe not everyone's thinking about the wireless airspace in terms of how they're being targeted. So what are the risks there? And perhaps maybe you could even share some anonymized stories of, what are real things that you and the team at Bastille have actually come across.
Yeah, sure. So we've done quite a bit of work with data centers over the years, and we've learned a lot. I don't know that we know all of the weaknesses, but the thing that occurs to me when I think about data centers that bothers me the most is data exfiltration. And wireless is a beautiful way to do that. Because for the most part, we're not paying attention to it. As an example, so we have tools in Wi-Fi networks, if you enable them, if you use good products, to help identify when a network penetration attack is taking place, and those are more or less effective some of the time, and they're good tools. But what happens if we're using Wi-Fi in some configuration that is outside of that purview? So there's nothing really to stop a hotspot from popping up, and there's no monitoring going on from like an enterprise vendor to identify that that could be a problem. So what we've seen, for example, is we've seen client devices inside of a data hall. So it's like rack mounted device that somehow has a wireless interface on it that connects to a mobile hotspot whenever it comes into the data hall. And then it remains active for some amount of time. And all that data traffic going back and forth, and probably going back to the cellular infrastructure and to who knows where else after that, none of that is being monitored. There's no flags being raised. And this can go on for weeks or months at a time. And so we have this big hole in our firewall, if you will, that we're just not paying attention to. But this stuff happens. We've seen it when we put Bastille into an organization like that, because Bastille was monitoring all of the wireless stuff. So now we see, oh, there's a hotspot that came in and it connected to a client, and that client doesn't move. So it's probably like in a rack somewhere. And then now you have a flag that can go, oh crap, I better do something about that. Let's go find that device and disable it, or do some other kind of investigation to dig deeper. Without that visibility, you just don't know that this stuff is happening.
Yeah, and to your point, monitoring all the stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Bastille software defined radios, they're just not watching traditional Wi-Fi. I mean, it's
Right.
it's Zigbee, Bluetooth low energy, and a million other things within
Yeah.
the spectrums, right? And it's doing that at a constant rate, which is,
Yeah.
to me, that's the most unique thing, because you've got people all the time walking around with some new Bluetooth audio device, video device, this, that, the other thing. It's just there's got to be a ton of, yeah, even in a secure location, the chances of something popping up, I'm guessing, is pretty high, right?
Yeah. So that's a great point. I'm glad you pivoted to that because I started off talking about Wi-Fi because we started with Evil Twin and Nearest Neighbor, and there's examples of us seeing that kind of behavior in Wi-Fi in a data center. But Bluetooth tethering is another mechanism whereby you can have data being exfiltrated and nobody's paying attention to the Bluetooth. So if now all of a sudden you see a Bluetooth network pop up and there's something static in the data hall, and maybe the other end of it is, it might not even be visible, or it may be that it's outside of the monitored environment or whatever it might be. Now you have a data path that is completely outside the purview of any monitoring system, other than a wireless monitoring system like Bastille. So you have to bring visibility to that. Again, otherwise you have a huge hole in your security that somebody clever, by using, I don't know, a little pair of dongles that they bought for $50, is just bypassed your whole security infrastructure. Another thing we see is clients switching networks. So they're on a secure internal network, and then they'll switch to something else. Maybe it's unsecure, maybe it's hotspot, maybe it's something else. And they can use that hopping behavior. Sometimes we see it persistently. They'll persistently switch from any one of two or even three networks. And in this just constant behavior that we don't see the IP layer, so I can't say for sure the data is being exfiltrated, but it's a risky behavior that I wouldn't want to allow, especially in a high security area where you care about data being secure in your data hall.
At least it's something suspicious that would warrant for further investigation that you wouldn't see through any other solution, right? You're not going to pick this up on your EDR, your firewall, or IPS or anything like that. This is unique to this kind of spectrum. Yeah.
It is, yeah. Another example that we had that was kind of interesting is in a data hall, we had some industrial chillers that had an unsecure Zigbee mode that had been enabled by the vendor that had installed them. And they did that for their own convenience so that they could connect and maintain those systems from the parking lot without having to go through all the physical security blocks. But that highlights the problem. Like if it's a dual home system, this ICS system is both wired and has this unsecured wireless mode, now it's wide open to exploitation. You shouldn't have that, but nobody has visibility until they start to like bring a system in and monitor and realize, oh crap, unsecured Zigbee, why is that there? Let's lock it down.
Yeah. And to lock it down often means, shutting it off, hardening those systems, so they're not running those bits. But to me, this is the equivalent of somebody going physically to the back door of the data center, and they prop open that secured door with a rock because that's where everybody goes out to smoke. And then they just leave it open.
For convenience, let's open this. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Interesting. Well, you and I were talking a little while ago about, in a backpack, you could fit dozens of these kind of devices that could be used for spying on organizations. And a lot of them are things that we all have, right? We probably all have a smartphone. We might have some kind of Bluetooth enabled ear pods or something of that nature. But there's these, there's speakers that are Bluetooth that some of them actually have hidden video cameras. There's spy pens, even though I don't know why you'd even need something like that these days. There's the hearing aids, the lav mics that have really long reach. I mean, long enough where if somebody gets something into a conference room, somebody else could be in a parking lot and still get that.
Yeah.
But the one that I was just going to say, the one that I thought was really interesting, and I didn't know these existed prior, were these ideas of these security cameras that could even be solar powered. But they have a SIM card and they store all their information in the cloud. So not only are they now even plugged in to get power, theoretically, or they could be, and they could have a backup battery as well, but they're capturing audio, they're capturing video, they're streaming it over a SIM. So it's going over the cellular channels. It's not going across your network or your data security, network security. Nothing's going to detect that. And it's sending it out to the cloud and if you drop a whole bunch of these in an organization, maybe people find one or two or 10, but maybe they don't find, the other 15 that you have located. And that to me is such a a massive risk. And I could think batch manufacturing, discrete manufacturing, power and energy, any kind of critical infrastructure, as well as executive boardrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we get away from data centers, I don't care too much about audio and video exfiltration from a data center because it's so loud in there. Nobody's
Yeah,
talking about anything important for the
it's all
most part.
fans.
And if you are able, if they are, it's hard to hear. There's too much noise going on. But in other environments, that kind of thing is really, really important. And there's, like you say, there's a whole slew of devices out there that either use Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, some kind of mechanism for command and control and for data exfiltration. And they're simply intended to extract audio and video information. So as you say, conference rooms, boardrooms, there are lots of things that go on in those kinds of areas that if you don't have visibility into this wireless exfil that could be happening, then you are at risk. And depending on your risk profile, maybe that's something you should be concerned about. So having the ability to bring systems in to monitor and identify that something like that could be happening could be crucial. We've also seen on executive floors these devices, and this sort of gets back to the data center idea because we've seen something like an OMG cable or USB Ninja. We've seen these cables on executive floors in large Fortune 500 companies. And the idea here is that if you plug that in, you power up either an access point or Bluetooth central, and you can pair to that other device from some other place and basically take over whatever device it's plugged into because it has HID privileges. So now you not only can exfiltrate data, you can do key logging, you can keystroke injection, you can take over the device basically. And we've seen these on executive floors. You could do the same kind of thing in a data hall. You could do a cable, but it's going to be much more conspicuous. But they have these little dongles, USB dongles, that do basically the same thing. So kind of like a bad USB attack, but now I have the flexibility to tailor the attack, to modify it by a wireless command and control. And that kind of stuff is really easy to slip in. It's
Yeah,
not hard to disguise, and they're very small form factors.
yeah, you mentioned those OMG cables. There's no visual inspection that's going to say, oh, this is one of those cables. They look
Right.
just like a traditional cable, whether it's on the
Exactly.
Ethernet side or the phone charging cable. I mean, they're. I maybe you could weigh it. I guess I don't know. You're not going to go
I
around
mean,
weighing
unless
all
you've
your
got an X-ray
cables.
machine and you know what you're looking for, you're not going to
Yeah,
know. So you really, the best thing to do is monitor the wireless so you can see that it's beaconing out. Otherwise, you
absolutely.
just don't know.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, so when it comes to a skiff, you've got these really secure locations where things can be quite binary. Like I should see
Mhm.
nothing, and if I see anything, that's a problem. Maybe,
Yes.
people aren't supposed to have their phone here, or there isn't supposed to be a Bluetooth anything, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But what about these organizations, the executive conference room at a tech company where everyone's got a bag full of things that they use for work and for personal use with them. Um, how can you in that type of environment, what's the best approach to sort of look for that, those suspicious signs or maybe even those malicious indicators?
Well, it's tricky, right? It's not enough just to see that something's there because there's a crap ton there.
Yeah.
So we're looking for that needle in needle in a needle stack because it looks just like everything else, but there's going to be some little behavior that would be concerning. So one of the things that we do at Bastille is we're constantly researching various threats and characterizing their behavior based on what our monitoring system can see so that we can fingerprint that threat, so we can differentiate it from normal behavior and build detectors that will automate the detection of that kind of behavior. And that can include misconfiguration. So there are things about like Zigbee that if it's in a mode that is vulnerable to a certain type of attack, it's going to send certain packets that will allow us to see that, hey, dude, your network is, it's open to these kinds of things. You should probably lock that down. So it could be just poor configuration, but then we'll also look for patterns of behavior over time that could indicate some probability of a threatening behavior as well. And for some things, we'll see it right away. Like an evil twin attack is pretty easy.
Mm.
There are various ways that we go about detecting them based on the flavor of the evil twin. That, again, there's lots of variations on a theme there. So we'll see that kind of thing pretty quickly, but there are other things that maybe build over time, and we can see that, hey, something is starting to get a little bit wonky. This maybe will elevate the threat level and point you to that and say, hey, it's over here. So you can see pattern of life. You can always go back in time and see where the device was in your space, because we're locating everything all the time. But if you see it and it's in there and it's showing some threatening behavior, now you can take some actions. That could be an automated response from some kind of a system that tries to shut it down, or it could be that you just go and interdict, investigate, whatever it is.
Yeah, I like how you phrase that. It's not just that that thing is there. It's taking all that other business and technical context together and sort of determining, okay, let's look at all the other supporting evidence, and collectively, one
Right.
plus one might not equal two in this case. So,
Yeah. And that's
yeah,
something that we're continually working to improve. The analytics approach is a layer on top of the detection and location piece. And it's just something that will continue to evolve as threats continue to evolve.
yeah, and clearly attackers are using this as a why bang your head against the front door if you can go through an unsecured
Yeah,
side door, right? Which is which
exactly.
is it's the biggest ROI for them for sure. Um,
Absolutely.
so Brett, it's always fascinating talking with you. If people want to learn more about the research that you and Bastille are doing, or just learn more about Bastille in general, what's the best place for them to find that data?
I think the best place to start is to go to our website, bastille.net, BASTILLE.net. And there's lots of content on there. We're always putting additional content out. We've got a blog that we maintain, and we're pushing new posts all the time. We do webinars routinely. So if any of that stuff interests you, just feel free to go there to start and dig in however it makes sense. And we're happy to interface with you directly if you have specific questions.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Brett, as always, thank you for being part of Mitiga Mic.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the time. Good to be here.